Hi, I'm John F. Allen. And I'm R.J. Sullivan. And we're the Two Towers.
Greetings and welcome to the Two Towers Talk Show. I'm your host, Tower 1, John F. Allen.
And I'm Tower 2, R.J. Sullivan.
Today, we're honored to have as our special guest, Thaddeus Howze. He is an award-winning writer, editor, podcaster, and activist, creating speculative fiction, scientific, political, and cultural commentary from his office in Hayward, California. Thaddeus's speculative fiction has appeared in numerous anthologies and literary journals. He's published 2 books, Hayward's Reach, which was published in 2011, and is a short story collection, and Broken Glass, published in 2013, an urban fantasy novella starring his favorite paranormal investigator, Clifford Ingram. He's also the creator of a series of articles called Writing Craft, Mastering the Urge to Write. Thaddeus works as a writer and editor for 2 magazines, The Good Men Project, a men's magazine challenging social norms for men in modern society. And he also writes for Krypton Radio, a media station and online magazine, writing articles on popular culture, science, technology, and superheroes. He has also appeared in numerous publications, including Black Enterprise, Gizmodo, Huffington Post, Polygon, Panel and Frame, and the BBC. Today, we welcome Thaddeus Howze to our show. How are you today, sir?
I'm great, John. How are you guys doing? I appreciate you having me here.
I'm doing great. I can't speak for RJ, but I'm excited to be here and honored to meet you. I've read a lot about you. We've been Facebook friends for a while, and I'm interested in sharing you with our audience.
I'm also doing very well. I will say that as has been the case in these recent interviews, I'm going to be the one kind of learning about one of John's heroes, and it's always entertaining and enlightening, and I'm looking forward to that experience today. So thank you and welcome to the show.
For having me, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, we'll dive right in for our audience. Thaddeus, can you tell our audience about your writing? What's your origin story?
You mean the Answer Man's origin story? The Answer Man's origin story actually started way back in 1997. I was teaching at a college, and we were still enjoying the internet, and we were experimenting with different websites. And one of the things I used to do between whatever I was doing, running the lab, teaching the kids, teaching classes, whatever it was, I would go to the science fiction website and we would talk about superheroes. And a lot of guys would talk about superheroes and they would say these things, and I'd be sitting there. In the beginning, I just kind of sat and watched, but the longer I watched, the madder I got. And I was like, okay, you guys are like saying crazy stuff. So let me set it straight. So I started writing. And during that period, I became what was called the closer. Basically, people have a bunch of arguments, and then I would write a response, and then that response would close the thread. The thread would never move after that. So I became the closer. And it wasn't a title I wanted. It just happened that way because once I wrote about it, that was the end of that topic. But over the years, I started finding that there were a lot of people who didn't know a lot about it. And this is before Wikias. So right now, if you want to know about a superhero, you can go to a Wikia, and there's all kinds of stuff written now. This is before Wikias. So I made something called the StarNet database. And I basically took all my favorite heroes and wrote out bios and profiles, a la the Marvel Handbook. So I started doing all that stuff just for fun, just out of, I don't know, I won't say boredom because I had enough to do. I just wanted to do something different. And so this was different for my job. And I enjoyed it. I liked it. And I did it for a long time. And then my job got really busy and the closer disappeared. But then a few years after I left my last big corporate job, I started feeling the itch again. And I started writing. I started writing science fiction stuff and short stories and stuff like that. And then the urge to start answering questions reappeared because people were like, hey, I remember you. You're from this other board. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, you remember my name. And so they convinced me to come to write for the Sci-Fi Stack Exchange. And the Stack Exchange's goal was that if you had a question, someone of our staff, someone who was not getting paid, someone who's doing this purely from the love of the game, would write an answer that would hopefully answer your question. So it could be about movies, books, televisions, short stories, whatever, and people would take a stab at it. So I found this new community. I started writing in it again, and I loved it. And so for a long time, I'd say probably 6 to 8 years, that's what I did. I wrote there, and yeah, we fought a lot because, you know, there were structure issues and style issues, and some people like one style, others like others, but I was like, I'm going to write my style. So my style became my style. I stylized a particular way of writing stories and writing answers, and that style became one of the definitive styles. Many people actually copied that style because it was clear, clean, and because of the way the rules of the site were set up, it was easy to follow. So I wrote there for many years, and that's when I became the answer man. I started answering those questions. And then when I migrated to Quora, I decided, well, what the hell? Why don't I just go ahead and claim it? Since people keep calling me that, I decided to go ahead and do that. So I started writing on Quora, again, superheroes primarily, but a lot of other stuff too, because Quora it kept me interested enough that I could answer other questions. And so then I started tagging my documents with "the answer is," and, you know, the answer man accepts your challenge. So people would post a question, and then I would accept the challenge and write an answer. And so then the answer man came into being. And then I had a guy named Marcus Kwame who invited me to come to his show called Black Comics Chat. And he made a character for me to appear in the ad. It was dressed in Icon's colors. It looks like Icon, except, you know, with a big answer logo on the chest. And I was like, that's so cute. I like that. And my wife saw it, and she's like, oh, that's awesome. Are you going to buy that from him? I'm like, yes. So I said, I'll just go ahead and send him money and say, Kwame, you want to sell me? He's like, yeah, sure, go for it. So now it's mine. So that little answer guy, if you ever see him, you know, if you do a search for me, you'll see him eventually. That's actually the logo icon I took for that. And so then the answer man became a real live thing that took off on its own and became a segment of who I am as a writer. So that's how the answer man came into being.
I have a not so serious follow-up and an actual follow-up to that. So my first question, kind of for John, is I've been watching John and Frank on Facebook for years, posting about this one argument about who is stronger. Do you want to pick up on that, John, and see what the closer has to say?
Well, the answer man, yes, absolutely. So a mutual friend of ours, Frank Smith III, he loves for people to mention his name. Yes. After the show, I'll tell you something that will amuse you. But anyway, he and I have been in this debate about the Superman and Thor. Now, yes. Technically, I kind of agree with him in one aspect, that Thor, through the enhancement belt and all of this, can be stronger than Superman. But what it really boils down to is the Marvel DC crossover where Superman wields Mjolnir, and he says that he did not lift the hammer as a technicality, so he cannot be said to have been worthy to lift the hammer, even though he wielded the hammer. And I said, if you're going to be technical, from him lifting it off the ground, that's fine. But he did hoist it over his head, so you know that is a form of lifting. So that we're asking the answer man today. What's the answer to that question? Did Superman actually lift Thor's hammer, or is this just some semantics with regards to him wielding?
Okay, let's start at the beginning of that. Is Superman stronger than Thor? They've never actually given us. Okay, Superman has been given a quantifiable reference point. We have said that Superman has lifted the earth, the weight of the earth, for 5 days, denied of sunlight, and it's in a particular comic whose I've referenced many times when people ask, how much can Superman move? So according to this device, it gave the lifting capacity to be 5 times 10 to the minus 34 weight of the earth. I was like, okay, that's nice. That's quintillions of tons, like 6 quintillion tons. That's a lot. Thor has never been given that. Thor's never been given a quantifiable lifting limit, which means nothing to me, because DC and Marvel have always had that particular dichotomy. DC's always had godlike men. No, man-like gods. DC is full of man-like gods, and Marvel is full of godlike men. And so the distinction between the two is that Superman will always be stronger than anybody else around him at any moment in space and time. That's just the nature of his mythic origin. Thor is a mythic being who hangs out with mortals. And so he is written so that he does not just completely outshine the mortals he hangs out with. Otherwise, it's just Thor and company, and it's not the Avengers. So the nature of how they've written him, he has been written as a more mortal being. Is Thor incredibly strong? Yes. We have seen him do incredible feats, particularly when he's using Mjolnir as an amplifier. I'm going to say, if I had to pick, I'd say Superman is stronger than Thor, but if they should ever mix it up, what usually ends up happening is what I call the narrative balancing. Two characters of immense strength narratively become balanced in the nature of their fight, because each will rise or fall depending on how they look at their interaction. Thor, of course, because he's a warrior god, rises to that challenge. Superman, as a pacifist trying to bring balance, would challenge Thor at Thor's level, because that's the nature of how they think. So their fight would be epic and awesome, and 9 times out of 10, they would end in a draw, just because they are who they are. They're the peaks of their narrative story universes. So when we're saying quantifiable lifting, we have to say that Superman has been given a quantifiable feat. Thor has never been said, Thor, stand on this scale, lift this planet. Has Thor destroyed planets? Absolutely. With Mjolnir, he can do that. Now that he has Mjolnir and the Odin Force, he's surely able to do that. But Superman has always been able to destroy planets. So you have to say that for the most part, the way they're written, they're pretty equal. When Superman's off-world and he's doing off-world stuff, he's awesome off-world. You never see him do any of that stuff on Earth because, he can't do that on Earth. Earth has environments and stuff. In space, there's no environment. Superman can be incredibly awesome. Same for Thor. When Thor is on Earth, Thor rarely uses his power. And we learn that when he beats the snot out of Tony Stark. Remember that clone saga thing where he clones Thor, and then Thor finds out about that, and Thor confronts Iron Man and says, you forget who I am. And I know you forget because you got this great technology, but let me show you who I am. And he beats Iron Man within an inch of his life. I mean, blasting his suit right off. Iron Man's like, I built this. No, that means nothing when Thor's really angry. Thor beats Iron Man in about 2 pages. And then when when Iron Man says, well, how am I supposed to get home? My suit's ruined. And Thor coldly turns and says, walk. And I was like, oh, there we go.
Yes.
There we go. That was the answer right there. Walk, get some humility. And I love it. It was brilliant. So I'm not saying that they're not awesome. I just think that their universes are so different that they're awesome in different ways. And whenever you pull them into one universe, they're never going to be as cool and as amazing as they are in their universes, separate from each other. So I love them. And that little crossover, I remember Thor swinging Mjolnir and Superman catching it. And Thor says, no, that's not possible. And Superman says, hey, on my universe, the dial goes to 11. And that's the answer right there. In the DC universe, things are just bigger. So that's my answer.
Okay.
Well, I will definitely make sure that Frank Smith III does listen to this. And if he has any follow-up questions, I'll be sure to send it your way.
The answer man awaits your challenge.
Hey, we always cover the important stuff here on the Two Towers. So
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And I had the same exact reaction to that particular comic that you did. And I was like, dude, so Stark is so arrogant to begin with. And then you got Thor, who's like, he's boastful, but he backs it up, and he knows who he is, and he's like, dude, I am a god. Do you know who you're talking to?
Do you know who you're talking to?
And Stark was like, oh, well, I've done this and I've done it. Yeah, okay, great. You're a great mortal, but guess what? You're still a mortal. And it's funny. And one more thing I'll follow up on that with is that Frank Smith III, I love saying his name because he loves people to say his name.
The full name, yes.
Yes, the full name. There's an issue of, I think it is the Immortal Hulk. And Hulk hits Thor so hard he knocks a tooth out.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so Frank Smith III is one of the biggest Thor fans I've ever seen. I mean, if Thor were real, he would probably swoon and faint at the mere sight of him. And
he'd be a worshiper.
Wow.
he'd be a worshiper.
Right. And so I'm like, okay, what you got to say about your boy now? Hulk hit him, and he said, by Odin's beard. And then Hulk said, your daddy can't help you now.
Can't help you now. Yep.
Okay. Frank Smith III, we love you. We tease out of love. So I just want to get that in there before I get my real question out. So I consider myself a bit of a comic. I know what I know. I'm big into classic movies. I'm into a whole lot of things, but several times things come up that I just either I've missed, it's a blind spot. I got to go and dig a little deeper. And some people are even like, it seems like that should be 101. And how did you not know that? And so all of which is to ask the question, where are these subgenres where you feel I don't even have to look this up. I know this off the top of my head. What are the things that you can answer without having to go to any resource? And what are your favorite things that you love to talk about with little to no prompting?
Comics, superheroes. That's my thing. That's why it's the thing I write most on Quora, because so many of the questions that get asked are 101 questions, but they're so old in some cases. I keep forgetting that, do you remember when the 80s is? Think about it for a minute. 80s, 90s, 2000, 2010, 2020. The 80s is 50 years ago.
Right.
I mean, think about it. Because it took me, I'm just like, the 80s, what's wrong with the 80s? Nothing. It's just that it was 50 years ago. So when people are talking about comic questions, a lot of those questions are from the 70s and 80s, where they may have either never seen the comic or only had the comic referenced, or the comic has become legendary and now they're taking it out of context, or they're taking a feat that happens in that one comic and applying it across the entire time and space. It's like, no, that was good 50 years ago. It may not be real or relevant today. So for me, that's why I do comics, because I've been reading comics forever, and I've actually made the effort to go back to the date of my birth and then read backward, so that I've read back to the 40s.
I got you.
Enjoyed them. So for me, reading forward now is like, it's because from the 80s or from the 70s when I started reading to now where I still read, I'm really comfortable. But, if you go back to the 80s backward where people struggled, 70s and 80s, that whole window is like, that was a golden age for Marvel and for a little bit for DC. But a lot of people just didn't know how many comics were coming out. They didn't know all the characters. A lot of characters just appeared once and writers couldn't make him interesting, so he never appeared again. And, it's just, there's so much there. That's my thing. I live in a parallel universe. That's people laugh when I say, I have enough capacity that I can store the Marvel universe over here, the DC universe over here, and every other alternative I've ever read sits in another little region back here, and I'm good to go. We can talk about comics at any time.
Okay,
movies, not so much. I mean, I like movies. Don't get it twisted. I like Star Trek. I know the big franchises, the ones that I like. Books. I read books a lot until the early 2000s, and then after I started writing, I read a lot less. I'd only read the best of the best, and so I'm good up until a certain point. So when I was working on the Stack Exchange, for example, that was how I worked. I did all comics, most movies, most sci-fi movies, because I don't really care about non-sci-fi movies. They don't generally move me. And then books up into a certain period. And those were the places I go through. And if you go to my Stack Exchange reference, you can see they actually track every question you've ever answered about any topic. So it tells you how many questions you answered, where those questions are. If you click on the link, it'll take you to the questions themselves. And so it's like, it's an instant database of what you know. And so if you want to know what I know, the Stack is one of the places you can check, because that is where I've got my big profile as a answerer of questions.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up with that era that you're referring to was when I was a boy, and then when I was seriously collecting, and then into the 90s, and it was such a golden age, not in the specific sense, but it was a time of great upheaval, a lot of changes, a lot of maturing for the industry. It was a really rich time to be a collector, and yeah, I really treasure being a young adult at that time. Like if I were to answer, I would say more specifically Spider-Man was my guy, and then Wonder Woman on the DC side. But what you're saying is it's more of an era thing for you, where you're really you know it, and then you've gone on and expanded on that.
I love it. It is what I do. Do I have favorites? Of course. I'm wearing my favorite. Okay, so I have favorites.
And we're not video, so he's wearing a Superman shirt, guys. So.
Yeah. So yeah. So, I have my preferences, but it doesn't mean that I don't write about the whole era. Like if you read I have a bunch of posts all over the place. I probably have as many Superman posts as I have any other character, because that's generally where I start from when people ask me about stuff. And it's where most misinformation seems to happen on sites, where it's like Superman can do this. No, he cannot do that. and they go, well, he did it here. I'm like, yeah, but that's a narrative cheat. It's not something he's doing every day. And so we have that argument of, what's real and what's narrative freedom that a writer is taking at that moment. And, when they take those narrative freedoms, you almost never see that superpower or that ability again, because it was a narrative freedom, not a real superpower.
Gotcha.
So I have some follow-up to all the things that you just said, but I'll start with the whole idea of people, how far back you go. I did the same thing. I went back, I read actively since 1975, and I went back beyond that to the 60s, the 50s, and the 40s, just to get an idea, because I was so immersed into that particular media. And I've read so much from trade paperback editions of volumes of things that went back into past issues and forward from 1975. And I've reread some comics just to re-experience certain storylines at a different point in my life, because you have a different perspective from being 5, 10, 15, 20 to 50 than you did. I can take something that I've read and it hits me different at 50 than it did at 5 years old. But a lot of what you were saying, Thaddeus, has a lot to do with something that I encounter with people, and specifically younger people. Now, there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, with being young. We all have, if we've lived, we've experienced that to get to be older. But the thing is a lot of younger people aren't reading comics the way that we did, and aren't maybe reading them at all. And that being said, a lot of the exposure that they have to comics and comic related characters is through another media entirely, and that's the movies and the television shows. So a lot of the grand richness that we have, the established, backstory that we witnessed unfold in the comics, they don't have that. They don't have that from a practical standpoint of having read the works, and they don't have it from the nostalgia standpoint. So they're at a loss. And so when you're talking to folks and there's, they're talking about MCU Iron Man, and they're saying something, and then, oh, well, this is that, and this cheapens the comics. Well, have you ever read the comic? And then if you haven't, you don't know, because you can't speak upon something that you have not experienced with any authority. I mean, if you've never been punched in the face, you don't know what that feels like until it actually happens. And when it does, you will remember it.
Hold on, you can think about it. You can visualize it. You could, this is what I imagine being punched in the face is like.
Right.
But until you've actually been punched in the face, and trust me, I have. It's a different, it's different from what I imagined it would be. I thought it'd be like this, but actually, holy cow, I can't see. I feel stars. I'm dizzy. What? None of this was part of my imagination. Now I have real quantifiable evidence that being punched in the face is highly undesirable. And I now know why.
Right.
So it's a different phenomenon, experiential, it's an experience. You now know it, you feel it, you live it. And that's a different thing.
Right, exactly. And I think that when we're dealing with people who are younger, who are not native comic book readers, we have to give them some leeway to a certain extent to say, I know why you don't have that knowledge base, and I know that this is kind of new to you. But we also have to, or we don't have to, but I think it would be kind to educate them and to refer them back to the original source material so that they can have a greater appreciation for what it is that they are watching, and they can experience a new media at the same time. And this also can help the comic book industry with sales and other things to keep it alive. So I take that as a challenge and a responsibility when it comes to millennials and younger, because I think that when you look at the millennials, right at the times that we were talking about with the comic industry, they were either at the end of that time, they were just starting to read comics, if they ever read them at all. And then anybody younger, really, their exposure to the characters is through television and film. So I like to take that opportunity to educate some of the younger people or whatnot. And when I tell them I started reading comic books in 1975, they're looking at me all kind of weird, like, 1975.
Like people were alive back then? Yeah, that's
right,
what they looked
right. Were things in color? I mean,
right, yeah. Was your world in black and white then?
Right, so you've got that kind of thing. And, it's fun to think about. But one of the last things that you were referring to with regards to the DC and Marvel, the comics, and just in general or whatnot, for me personally, I've always had a love of the media from the very beginning, but it also spawned a love for literature. So my love for comics and the TV shows, the reruns of the Adventures of Superman with George Reeves, Batman with Adam West, Burt Ward, and then of course coming up with the new episodes of Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk and the Spider-Man miniseries and the Captain America TV movies, and then the Doctor Strange and all of those, as well as the animated cartoon series or whatnot. Those things captured fantasy for me and in science fiction. And so I started to, pivot away from not a pivot away, but also to turn to other sources of that type of material. And so I started reading novels that were science fiction and fantasy, and my love for greater films and things came to be. And I started writing in the first grade because I was seeing all of this, and I started writing little stories. And I mean, the building was on fire. Batman saw his bat signal. He raced to the scene and he swung into the window. He saved the little girl. The end. I mean, I was all of 7 years old, but it started something with me that has continued to this day as a writer. And so this is all setting this up. Dun, 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 dun. Who are some of the major influences for you in your writing career?
All right, so I'm a reluctant writer. Let me explain. I grew up like you did. 70s, comics, 9 years old, 10 years old, Spider-Man was the man. Superman was the other man. So when they had that Spider-Man, Superman crossover, the giant size one, I know you know the one I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
That was a world-altering, life-changing experience. It's like, oh my God, the best of the best of the best. And the only thing I ever saw that size that was better was that Superman Muhammad Ali one, which was even better. I was like, I am in heaven. There is nothing beyond this moment. And so it was that awesome for me. And I wanted to be a writer, but my family was very religious. So comics were verboten. I mean, verboten. I wasn't allowed to read them. Wasn't allowed to have them. So my comic collection lived under my bed, hidden away from it, prying eyes. I could only buy a few. I read them all on the stands, but I could only buy a few and smuggle those home and hide them. And when I was 16 years old, that collection was discovered and destroyed. Never wanted to think about it again, never wanted to write about it again. And I didn't start rereading comics again until after I joined the military a couple of years later. When you're at sea, you need comics. You need something. Oh my God, you're at sea. And you're at sea for weeks, months. It goes on forever. There's nothing around you but the flatness of the ocean and the crazy people in the room with you. You need books. So comics became my escape. I could stack as many. If I were willing to wear less civilian clothes, I could have more comics. I mean, that's how it was. You had a limited amount of space. So everything everything had to be built into your rack. So your rack was a closet. It was your storage place where you kept your uniforms, where you kept your books. Anything you wanted to keep, you kept it in your rack. So I kept comics and books in my rack. That was my release from being insane, trapped around other insane people in the military. Back then, I discovered a man named Roger Zelazny. Roger Zelazny was a lunatic. And I'm completely okay with that because everything he wrote, I loved. I loved that. He made me want to write again. I didn't because I still had that fear, that thing. But when I got out of the service, I went to college, I left college. And around 1993, I met a friend of mine who was interested in writing role-playing game material. Now, I've been a role-playing gamer since high school back in '81. And I'd always wanted to write it. I had always thought about it. And then one day I decided, you know what? I'm reading a bunch of game material out here that's trash. I've been running games for 20 years now. I can do better than this. So let me write some stuff. So we started writing stuff. I started writing my stuff down, sharing it with my friends. They're like, this is really good. So one of our friends, a young man named Chris Hockabout, he was drawing for Artel Saurian Games. He was drawing an interior black and white art. And he said, I think we could do a publication for you. And they looked at him and it's like, get out of my face, kid. You're young. You don't know anything. But at that point, I was in my mid-30s. And I was feeling bored at my day job. I was an IT guy. I was bored. I was like, you know what? I could do this job with my hand tied behind my back. So when Chris brought me the topic, I was like, sure, I can help out. So we started doing that. And when we were done, we tried to sell them on this. This is a copy. This is one of the only copies remaining of a publication called Interface. This is Interface number 1. And we tried to convince Mike Pondsmith of Artel Saurian Games back in 1990. God, how long ago was this? There's a date on here somewhere, but I believe it's 1993 for this very first issue. We made six issues, 1 to 6, and it was an interesting project. It got better each time we did it, and once I did that, I knew I was going to write again. I didn't know when, but I knew I would write again. So I wrote these things, and there's 6 of them. They're all here. I was cleaning out my garage and found all 6 of them, so I decided I would put them up on my shelf because that's really the beginning of my writing career. And then somewhere around 2009, when the economy collapsed and Barack Obama became president, I had a lot of spare time on my hands because, well, nobody was working, or at least I wasn't working. And my wife's like, well, she found some stuff I'd written back when I was in college. She said, this is really good. Whose is this? She said, why are you saving someone else's work? I said, no, that's my work. She said, there's no name. I said, because that's the teacher's, but the teacher wanted to read our work without bias. So we typed our essays up, we submitted them. She just graded them. She didn't know who they went to. She laid them out on the table. When it came time for you to get a grade, you walked to the table, you found your essay and you pulled it out. And that's how you knew your grade. And this was her way of keeping her bias out of it. I later learned that she could tell who you were just from reading your work, but I didn't understand that as a writer then. I know it now. Mm-hmm. But she liked my work. I got good grades. I almost always got a B, never an A. And the reason I never got an A was because I never wrote what she wanted. I wrote what I felt. So she'd give us a topic. I wasn't interested in that topic. I'd write some science fiction stuff on that topic, not the topic. And this way I would weave it into a story. And she's like, these are great, but this isn't what I asked you to write. So you will never get an A. And I'm like, I'm okay with that. So she gave me B's. But she ends up becoming the person who ends up teaching me the most about writing. So I end up staying her student for almost like 5 years. And then when I did my first book, Haywood's Reach, she was my editor.
Oh, nice.
So I submitted it to her. I said, Jan, you're the only person I trust with my writing to be cruel and savage and tell me the honest to God truth. So here's my manuscript. So she read it. She made her notes just like she always has. She says, I love this. You should do this. And I said, okay. So I made her corrections and I made a book out of it. And that book became my first book in 2011. That's 2 years after I decided I was going to write. Since then, I've been writing pretty much nonstop. If you follow me on Facebook, you will probably find I've 3 dozen essays. I've got 3,000 essays on between Quora and the Stack Exchange. I've got 3,000 essays just between the two of them. Another 500 essays all over the internet and a variety of other places. So I write a lot. I don't publish a lot, but I write a lot and I put a lot of stuff into the world. But I feel like I haven't had the emotional strength to publish a book. The emotional, psychological strength to publish a book because I'm dealing with my son who's on the autism spectrum, my wife who's on dialysis, and I feel like a lot of my emotional energy is tied up in dealing with their challenges as well as my own. And so for me to sit down and try to write, I've tried, and I've got 6 different books out there that I've written parts of, but emotionally can't hold my strength together to finish. But I haven't given up on them. So they're still out there and I'm still writing them. And so Zelazny, C.S. Friedman, Daniel Jose Older, Daniel Keys Moran, C.J. Sherry, Alan Dean Foster. Don't laugh. Alan Dean Foster's a good writer.
I love Alan Dean Foster.
I do.
A lot of people don't like him, but I like him. So he's on my list. Oh God, Jenny Wirth. Who else? There's so many. Can't think of her name right now. She just won an award. Wizard of Earthsea, the writer of Wizard of Earthsea.
Ursula Le Guin.
Ursula K. Le Guin. So there you go. These are and my literal man, the man, Ray Bradbury.
Oh yeah.
Ray Bradbury convinced me that I could write short stories. So that's when I started moving away from trying to write a novel and never finishing to writing short stories that I could finish. And Ray Bradbury became that role model that spoke to me from beyond the grave all the time whenever I write. And whenever I feel like I can't do this, I'm like, no, Ray Bradbury says you can, and you do, and you should. And so I keep doing it. And every so often I write something I'm really proud of, and it's like, yes. So, these are the people whose voices I hear. And in some cases who literally inspired the fingertips. I like when I was learning to write and I felt like I couldn't write the kind of writing I wanted to do, I would take a book from C.S. Friedman and sit it out in front of me and just write what she wrote. And I just wrote what she wrote. I wasn't creating anything new. I just copied I'm a speed typist, so it wasn't a problem for me to do that. And as I typed, I began to feel the rhythm. And I realized that every writer has a rhythm. They have a way. There's a secret language that they use to tell their stories. And so then I started learning her rhythm, and I was like, okay, I need to do this again. So I did it with Ray Bradbury, then I did it with Daniel Jose Older, then I did it again with Daniel Keys Moran. And then I said, now I understand that there is music. So now what is my music? So then I started writing again. And after that, I wrote my Clifford Ingram story in 2013. Because at that point, I began to feel like I knew I had a rhythm I could catch, that I could hear. And when it was good, I felt really good about that writing. And so then I started doing it. And then I woke up one day and just said, you know what, I'm going to write what I want. And if people don't like it, pardon my French, fuck them. That's what we're going to do. And that's what I did. And so since then, I write a lot. And a lot of times people don't understand it, or they'll come back to it a few years later and go, wow, that was really great. I just couldn't understand it at the time. And so I figure I'm writing it in a way that people are just not connecting to yet, but I'm confident I will get there. Just give me a little more time.
The Two Towers Talk Show is sponsored in part by OG Nerds, a new social media community dedicated to nerds of a certain age, 40 and over, although all are welcome. Members are encouraged to share articles and links on their favorite nerdy topics such as animation, anime, art, books, writing, comics, manga, movies, music, sports, tech, science, TV, video games, RPGs, and more. Be sure to visit them on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
The Two Towers Talk Show is sponsored in part by Showtime Cinema in Mooresville, Indiana. Their friendly staff is always willing to go the extra mile to make your movie-going experience an enjoyable and memorable one. Enjoy the comfort of their new cushioned seating in their spacious auditoriums, and while you're there, be sure to stop by the concession stand and purchase some popcorn where real butter topping is an option. They're located at 300 South Bridge Street in Mooresville, Indiana. We hope to see you at the movies.